For more information, visit rmcca.org.
And by the BZN International Film Festival, a 4-day event showcasing films that educate and inspire audiences to get involved and take action to protect our planet. For more information, visit bozemanfilmcelebration.com.
Montana Ag Live is made possible by the Montana Department of Agriculture, the MSU Extension Service, the MSU Ag Experiment Stations of the College of Agriculture, the Montana Wheat and Barley Committee, the Montana Bankers Association, Cashman Nursery and Landscaping, the Gallatin Gardeners Club, and the Rocky Mountain Certified Crop Advisor Program.
I've got hoppers in my wheat and my corn is not too sweet. Taters lying on the ground and my hay is turning brown. I planted and I've watered, I've done everything I oughta. Montana Ag Live, where are you?
Good evening. Welcome to Montana Ag Live, originating tonight from the studios of KUSM on the very vibrant campus of Montana State University. I'm Jack Riesemann. I'll be your host or moderator this evening. We're keeping with the same theme we've had all spring. We're featuring producers from around the state who have taken a base commodity, whether it be an animal product, a grain product, whatever, and moved it to the value-added concept. So we're going to have a very unique guest tonight. I'll introduce him here in a moment. But before we get started, I'll run through the whole panel. Kind of a special guest tonight. It's first time Brent Roeder. I have trouble with R's in there. He's our extension sheep specialist from the state, Montana State University. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Jack.
Our special guest, Brent Helly, or John Helly. I'll get it right here yet. John is a big sheep producer from down in the Dillon area. Plus, he is an owner of Duckworth clothing company, wool producer. We'll get into that this evening. It's kind of a unique combination of producing the wool and finishing it into a product. And it's really a great story. Stay tuned. You'll hear a lot about it tonight. Anton Beckerman, ag economist. He's also director of the Ag Experiment Station. So, Anton, you've been here many times. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Good. And Jane Mangold. Jane is our invasive weed specialist. If you have any weed questions tonight, please feel free to call them in. The number will soon be on the screen, and you can call it anytime you wish, and we'll try to get to it. The phone answers tonight from the left, Bruce Lobel, Barb Schaaf, and Nancy Blake. And thank you guys for coming in and taking questions this evening. John, I've been fascinated by what you do. I really have. Tell us a little bit about your operation and how this wool project got started.
Well, I'm the third generation on our ranch, and we raise sheep down in southwest Montana. And it's kind of always been one of my desires to see the products that we produce on the ranch on an actual consumer or consumed by an actual consumer. And the unique thing about being in the sheep industry is you've got this product called wool that we can shear it and store it. We don't have to, it's like doesn't have a shelf life. It doesn't have to go right to slaughter. And we can add a lot of value to it, produce some wonderful products out of it. And we just kind of always wanted to do something like that. And the timing came along where I got to know a guy from Rob Bernthal, who is one of my partners in Duckworth, that came to me and approached me with an idea of starting a merino wool, or our sheep are Rambouillet, but they're a derivative of the merino, and we produce a merino type wool. So we embarked on this venture to take our wool all the way to a finished product.
I asked you before the program how the company is growing, and you might just say how fast this Duckworth company has been growing.
Well, my son, who was a student from Anton here, is instrumental in helping me in this company. He's got a ag business and economics degree from Montana State University. I have a econ and animal science degree from Montana State University. And, you know, I found out firsthand what it's all about, startup companies, and the enormous amounts of capital and commitment and time that it takes to put that type of a company together. And you know, you hear horror stories like, you know, most of them, 95% of them only don't even make it the first year. But we're entering our 6th year. I can't say that it's been smooth sailing the whole way, but I can say that I've got some great partners. We've got just an awesome team at Duckworth. We've had some very, very good people working for Duckworth. My son Evan has just been very, very helpful in helping us get this project underway. And then thanks to all the consumers that just
That's the
love
key.
to wear wool.
Yeah.
You know, I think we have a little clip of some operations that you do in the spring. If we could show that on the screen, it's how you shear sheep and so forth and so on. So can we get that up on the screen? Here we are. You might just mention what's going on here.
Well, that's a bale of wool. We stamp it. This is our shearing operation, which is a little bit more like a gypsy operation, all portable out here in the Gallatin Valley. We winter some ewe lambs out here, a couple thousand head out on some farm ground, and we've got a small place out in around the Manhattan area. These are shearing crew from that came from South Dakota, so we use shearing crews from all over the states and from around the world too. We'll have some Australian and New Zealand professional sheep shearers. That's Rob Bernthal, my partner.
That's pretty impressive. I got involved with shearing sheep once in my life, and I will say my hands felt great for a short period of time. Back to Brent. This person from Manhattan said they are seeing record wool prices over the past 2 years. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, there is, Jack. Wool prices, you know, Anton could probably go into a dissertation on world trade and supply and demand for us, but basically what's happened since 2000, the sheep industry in Australia, they've lost about 50 million head of fine wool producing sheep out of Australia. So they've tried to transition more towards a prime lamb production system. They're importing or exporting a bunch of lamb into the United States, and so they've gone away from their traditional merino wool production system. A lot of them have. And so with the loss of that 50 million, they, at one time in the year 2000, they had about 125 million head of sheep. They're now down to about 75 million head of sheep in Australia. So that loss of 50 million head of sheep put a big hole in the supply for the whole world, basically fine wool production. On top of that, we've seen a big resurgence in companies like John, American-made products, sustainable, recyclable, a product that wears well and is environmentally friendly. And so that combination of a lack or a big decrease in supply and an increase in demand has created basically record wool prices the last 2 years.
John, does that help your company or not? You got two sides. You produce the wool, but you also process it.
Well, I'm also a sheep producer, and,
Right.
and you know, the reason why we got into this is to increase the demand and the value of the products we produce on the ranch. So if we're helping to spur the demand and increase the price of wool, you know, we're right now we're able to fulfill the requirements or the needs of our company through our own flocks, but that's only in the time being. We're looking to you know, expand into purchasing a lot of wool for our company.
Okay.
And so if we can spur the demand and get more people raising wool, it's going to be good for all of us. And textiles, wool textiles is only 3% of world textiles, less than that. And you know, a lot of it's carpet and stuff too. So the apparel trade in wool is very small.
Right.
So there's quite a niche in wool apparel.
And you know, Montana, it's actually well known for its wool. And for example, last year, Montana wool had the second highest value in the U.S. So I think there's knowledge from the market that there's really good wool coming from Montana producers, and I think that keeps demand coming back for that high quality product. So I think that certainly has helped Montana be at the top of that growing demand.
All right. Watching them shear sheep, how much wool do you get off standard size ewe? pound-wise?
Well, it all depends. Wool is sold on a clean basis. So if wool would get a lot of sand and dirt in them, you can get a pretty heavy fleece. But we're trying to keep the the cleanliness of the fleece. So on a grease basis, which is in the grease or not cleaned, we're usually shearing about 10 pounds. Isn't that about average in Montana?
A little under.
As you could see when we were shearing the sheep, we were throwing the wool on a table. So the belly comes off, we skirt the wool, the tags and pieces, and several off sorts come off of that. So we're removing about 1.5 pounds of wool that goes into a different line, and then the main fleece wool is about 8.5 pounds.
That's quite a bit. I'm surprised. Change the tune a little bit here. This is a question out of the Bitterroot last week for Jane. We put it off because we did not have a weed scientist, but this person has a field of knapweed that he wants to spray with herbicide. How long after spraying should he wait before letting goats feed on the knapweed?
Yeah, well, it depends on what he's spraying the knapweed with. If you should always read the label on the herbicide that you're using, and those herbicide labels actually have information on there about grazing restrictions. And depending on the herbicide that you're using, it could be a day to 2 weeks to 6 months to you shouldn't graze after using this herbicide. So make sure you are reading that label and you're aware of what those restrictions might be.
Speaking of weeds, and go back to John and you, both of this, but you mentioned clean wool. I have golden retrievers, and there's a couple weeds that really stick to them. Do you have problems with your sheep and specific weeds that would make the wool not as clean per se?
Yeah, some of the weeds like cockleburs and hound's tongue and burdock or some of the common ones around here that can really cause a lot of issues. They stick to the wool. Wool is like the opposite side of the Velcro, and the weed is like the hook side. Hook and loop?
Yeah.
I guess sheep are the loop. So it can pose a lot of problems. Some of the harder burrs like hound's tongue and sandbur, those can be combed out. But burdock explodes once it's in the fleece, and then it just increases the vegetable matter and can cause lots of problems down the line. So those weeds are pretty well sought out after on our operation if we see them and eliminate it as quickly as possible.
John, do you have any issues with toxicity, certain weed species? I know sheep are a little, they can handle some things maybe that cows can't, but are there any issues with that?
Sheep can buffer weeds a lot better than cattle. Sheep eat leafy spurge, and actually leafy spurge is one of, if you look at how well sheep do on it, and it's a very good feed for sheep. Knapweed somewhat is okay also, but sheep, there are certain weeds that have problems. Some of the native forbs are actually problems. Larkspur is a problem for cattle, but sheep can consume it. So we do graze a head of cattle with our sheep to remove larkspur. Lupine, we've had some problems with lupine. And last year, if you were out in the countryside, you saw lots of white flowers that look like onions. That's called death camas.
Yeah.
We had some issues with death camas, and that was pretty prevalent around the state. It was just an incredible death camas year last year. And that's deathly poisonous to sheep.
Right.
In certain quantities.
Is that due to the wet winter we had last year, the excessive amount of water? Do you know? Does that favor?
It could be. I don't know what specific conditions favor death camas, but it seems like every year on rangeland there's a certain native plant or a certain weed that just ends up doing really well.
And death camas a lot of times only gets to be an issue after you have late spring snowfall because the top of that flower is sticking up out of the snow, and it's one of the tallest things at that point. And so sheep or cattle come along after that 6-inch snowfall and just eat all the tops off, and that's where you end up a lot of times with those problems. And
It is highly toxic.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Jane, this person also mentioned sheep. This person has a large amount of bed straw, which is really sticky. It's also known as catchweed. Number one, how can he control it? And John, do you have bed straw issues where you're at?
I don't think I do. We've got a native one called Stick Tight, that's kind of a problem. If you're out in the foothills and it sticks to your socks or your dog's really bad, it's a native annual. But I'm not familiar with bedstraw.
The bedstraw or catchweed is more of a, I think it's more of a disturbed area weed. I mean, I find it growing all over in the alleys in Bozeman. I don't see it much on native rangeland, but it's an annual, and I mean, the best thing you can do is when you first start seeing it, it tends to climb if it's given the chance, and just reach down and pull it out before it has a chance to keep growing. I don't know what the situation is with this viewer in terms of how much they have, but it very easily pulls out of the ground.
Unless you have 4 acres.
Yeah, well, it still pulls out of the ground.
Right,
Usually
right.
there's just 4
Good
acres
point.
to pull.
Once it gets in, it is highly invasive.
It's been an interesting plant to watch the last few years. It is, I think, 2,4-D or dicamba will take care of it early in the season.
If you got to get it really early.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. From Bozeman, a sheep question. Where can this person buy lambs? The initial question is, do you sell sheep for eating consumption? And I'm sure the answer is yes, but let's take it a step farther. Where in Montana can you get good lamb?
Well, local lamb it can be difficult to find. Anybody that's in the livestock business or the food industry knows that we're kind of having a bit of a constriction in our harvest facilities in the state. We'd like to see a few more. We do have some very good local people producing lamb. In this area, Highland Lamb, the Scott family out of Whitehall produces lamb that you can buy locally. Montana Natural Lamb is a rancher-owned co-op out of Big Timber. They do a phenomenal job. So Big Timber, Columbus area. High Five Meats out of Billings, another local family operation that do a phenomenal job. Hofelt Meats, if you're up on the Highline in the Chinook country, Max and his family. And then on a more regional scale, Mountain States Lamb Co-op. There's a lot of Montana producers. It was a co-op started in Wyoming, and it's basically they contract with, it's a co-op, and so the ranchers are members, they own the co-op, and those lambs get harvested down in Colorado and they get shipped all over the U.S., and so the rest of the U.S. gets to have a taste of what we really enjoy here in Montana, which is our prime lamb. I can tell you, I've traveled all over the U.S., and we not only produce some extremely good wool, we probably produce, I think, some of the best lamb in the U.S. So,
I like it.
yeah.
John, where do you sell your spring lambs? Do you move them out of state or?
We actually belong to the Mountain States Lamb Co-op.
Okay.
So we do have a group of following that always wants to have a lamb from the ranch. So, but it's getting more and more difficult, like Brent said, to find a packing facility to get those lambs harvested for us, and it's it makes it a little bit more difficult to get a local lamb. But being that we're in the Mountain States Lamb Co-op, what we do on our wether lambs they're the castrated males, is we keep those through the winter and grow wool on them.
Okay.
So our lambs are growing wool as well as our ewes. And then we'll shear those lambs, and then we background them in our own feedlots until they're about 120 to 130 pounds, and then we ship them to Colorado and put the last finishing on the lambs in Colorado closer to the kill facility.
Okay. In that respect, we have a question from Billings, and this person wants to know, are spring lambs finished with grain?
I'd say, a lot of the lambs have some grain in their finishing, but lamb, our lamb is almost a year old when it's harvested. And, I'd say 9 months or 10 months of that, they're on native rangeland.
Right.
And then when they're in our backgrounding lot at our ranch, they're on, our own produced forages like alfalfa, and we do some haylage with some sandfoin and, different types of grain and grain hay, and then we silage that. We do some corn too, buy it from the neighbor. And so I'd say, probably 10% or 15% of that finished lamb has been done on corn. Mm-hmm. And they'll just finish them off in Colorado on that last portion.
Okay. And you mentioned native pasture and so forth and so on. it's my understanding that both lamb and goats really minimize the presence of various different weed species. Are you finding that true on your ranch? And Jane, you want to jump in on that?
We do a lot of weed control, and we even do it for other operations. The sheep that we have here in the Gallatin Valley go across the river to the Gallatin River Ranch, and they work on some stubble fields and residual crop fields on around the Manhattan-Logan area. But the weeds that we're kind of targeting around like the Gallatin River Ranch and out around Logan are the winter annuals like cheatgrass and downy brome. Those are very invasive on native rangelands, and they're very dangerous for fire.
Yep.
So we can have a really good control effort with sheep, because 2,000 head of lambs with a herder can be really well manipulated into areas, and they're working on that cheatgrass biome. And I can actually see a difference. We've been in the valley now for about 12 years, and you're never going to get rid of cheatgrass. And that's some of the things that we look at. Weeds are, you know, in the Dillon area, we don't want any weeds. We're a very, very clean valley in Beaverhead County, and we're very vigilant about spraying weeds. But other parts of the state, weeds have already taken over. And so, you know, getting to Anton, you have to kind of look at them as a resource. And in that, you can work with people with extension service, and we've done a lot of that through the Montana, was it the Montana Sheep Project?
Sheep Institute.
Yeah, Montana Sheep Institute on controlling weeds. But I think once you look at a weed as more of a resource and match the type of animal that you're going to use on it to help control it and keep it in check, but also make some money off of it. Weeds are a very good converter of you know, soil and sunshine and water to you know, usable feed.
And sheep will do better on that than, say, cattle in general.
Sheep are a forb eater.
Right.
Cattle are mainly grass, sheep are mainly forbs, and goats are mainly like woody type species.
Right.
So a combination of the three species on a ranch is going to probably be your best to get, you know, the best utilization of your range ground.
And John, did you say you have cattle as well?
Yeah, we
on your
do.
ranch? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Good answer. Anton from Plentywood. Pulse industry, chickpeas, lentils, peas really have bloomed in Montana. This person wants to know, what's the market outlook for those crops this year?
Good luck.
Crystal ball time.
Yeah, crystal ball. Just like the sheep industry, pulses used to be niche, and I think that it's certainly grown quite a bit. But in the past year, we've had a reduction in prices in peas, lentils, chickpeas between 30 and 50% relative to what we've seen in a 10-year average. So that's been concerning, and there's a lot of concern that we're going to have huge reductions of acreage planted that is complementary to that 30 to 50%. And there was a very recent USDA prospective planting report that came out, and basically it showed that yes, we're going to have 10 to 25% reduction in chickpea acreage and lentil acreage, but actually pea acreage is expected to go up relative to last year. And I think that's an indication that that market and that those cropping rotations that include pulses, they're relatively permanent now in Montana. And it's really nice to see that producers in Montana have incorporated that into their rotations. And even with market fluctuations, we're not seeing as much of a drop in the production of those crops as one would expect if this was just a very early nascent market. So our price is going to rebound. Maybe. I really wish I had a crystal ball. A lot of that is going to depend on what's happening in India. There's an election upcoming in April and May in India. And if, depending on those election results, if the Indian tariffs, import tariffs go away, we are likely to see prices go up again. If they stay in place, we're likely going to have to wait until the domestic industry really ramps up.
Okay, thank you. Question comes to my mind. And knowing that peas and lentils are livestock really like them, you pasture some of your sheep on ground out in Manhattan that's had peas on it. Do they really enjoy it? Can they pick up the peas off the ground, or will they?
Well, what they do is they'll regerminate and
Right.
grow back. And there's nothing better than a pea field that's grown back. In fact, I was just out in Manhattan on the way back here. But we saved that field for last because we didn't know that there was going to be 2 feet of snow out there. And it kind of took them from a very nice pasture to pretty brown and washy looking now that 2 feet of snow sat on them for a month. But they are a good feed for sheep.
Yeah.
Do you see pea that's been grown for grain being a potential substitute for the current feed, the finishing feed that you have your sheep on?
I've always thought, market conditions are probably a lot of it, but they did have a little bit of chickpea that didn't make it on a truck, and you didn't know what to do with it because it's not a readily, disposable type commodity. So I took a bulk bag down there and I got 2,000 pounds of chickpeas. And I'm going to grind them up for our bum lambs or try and feed them. But I think it'd be an awesome.
It's a good feed. There are a lot of people feeding pea screenings right now, and I fed them at our place. I mean, they make a good feed, so the availability is not there like it is for feed barley or things like that. But people are feeding them right now and having good success with them. So.
I've been told, and probably not as important with lambs or ewes, but with beef, it adds a shine to their coat. And if you're selling bulls and so forth, that sheen that those pulse crowds provide can increase the value of those bulls that you're selling.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Brent, while we have you up, what's the average, this person from Helena would like to know what the average annual consumption of lamb is.
Average annual consumption of lamb in the U.S. For the last 20 years is really, it's held steady. It's been about a pound or a little under a pound per capita. I mean, we have about 350 million people in the U.S., something like that. And so that, based on our domestic supply, has been decreasing a little bit, and most of that has been backfilled by Australia, New Zealand imports of lamb. And they've kind of kept, if you look at the trend line, there's an informal agreement between Australia, New Zealand, and the U.S. to try and keep a steady supply of lamb in the U.S. so it benefits everybody. With the recent drought they've had in Australia, I would say Australia's been pushing us a little bit in terms of how much they're bringing into the U.S. currently. But that's kind of been where we've been at, and as we were talking off air earlier, and one of the presentations I gave to some of the students in one of the classes I taught was, people talk about the low consumption of lamb in the U.S. being at a pound and how bad that is. New Zealand, if you look at their per capita consumption of lamb in 2000, they were almost 60 pounds per person consumption of lamb. And in 2015, they dropped under a pound. And so to have that kind of market loss for a major sheep producing country. So when you put it in perspective, I'm not too worried about our less than a pound per capita consumption of lamb. I think we're going to grow it as the demographics change a little bit. I think we'll see that number increase, hopefully. So
I suspect the East Coast probably utilizes more lamb in their diets than the West Coast or the Midwest.
Oh, I would say both coasts do anymore. Okay. And we send a lot of lamb to the Caribbean islands, lamb and goat. Most people don't realize it, just as a side note, that the U.S. is the largest importer of goat meat in the world. The majority of that is coming out of Western Australia right now. So they have a feral animal that is destroying the outback, and they're basically packaging it and sending it to the U.S. as a premium product and making quite a bit of money doing it. And so that's a lot of what John's trying to figure out how to do. How do we do the niche market and make money doing it? And they've really found a good niche market there. So
it's impressive. Speaking of niche market, John, we got some stills here. Let's look a little bit at what else you do in your operation. And then also we're going to look at some of the products that you guys are producing. So if we can pull up the stills, and John will tell us a little bit about it.
Well, that's our sheep operation in the Sweetwater Basin, actually going on trail there. You can barely see the sheep out there in the sagebrush. Those mountains in the distance, those are the Snowcrest Range, where we trail our sheep through to their summer range in the Gravelies. And just some of the trail is down the road, but most of it's cross-country on old established trails. One of the trails is the Vigilante Stock Driveway that has been used for, hundreds of years.
Okay.
That's a typical camp tending rig. That's my son's truck with a dirt bike and a sheep wagon, and you'll see our Peruvian herder there with his 2 horses, and we're kind of a nomadic trail along just go as we go to the mountains. This is our shearing barn in Dillon, and some ewes waiting their turn to get shorn. And there's Brent Rader right there. Actually, Brent's an excellent sheep shearer. Does a lot with sheep shears and training, but we get the best of the best to our shearing shred, and that's a time of year in March when we invite special guests to our shearing and show them what we do, how we take the wool off the sheep, and the first stages in the process. That's Leah Johnson, Leah Nelson back then. She was an intern, and she's an excellent wool handler, throws a beautiful fleece, and we miss Leah. She's got her own sheep operation now that she's married, and we miss her a lot. She was the best intern we ever had. And after we pull the wool or put the wool on the table, we'll pull a sample, and this is the Montana State University Wool Lab, which has been very instrumental in helping do a lot of the research and development of testing wool that so we can allocate our wool into certain lines that all go to different types of fabric. And you can see I could go through some of the products that we produce and the different wool.
We have a question here about different types of wool in a moment. Before we get there, Anton, tell us a little bit about the function of the university with the Wool Lab.
Right, so the Wool Lab is one of the labs that is part of the Montana Ag Experiment Station. It's one of the only 2 labs in the country, wool labs, remaining. So it's a real gem to have it be here in Bozeman and part of Montana State University and Ag Experiment Station. It is instrumental in the research that goes on about wool quality, and it certainly produces a lot of insights about what producers can do to improve their wool quality and provide information that helps Montana's sheep and wool industry be better. And it's used quite a bit by many of the producers all across the Mountain West, and it really is, it's a gem. It's one of the 2 remaining, and it's really instrumental in the type of research and progress that's made in the quality of wool production.
It's a perfect mix between the private and the university sector.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Follow-up question for Anton. You mentioned it's one of 2 wool labs in the U.S. So how much does the MSU Wool Lab get utilized by other states?
Oh, a lot. It's quite a bit, and we have both folks from other states, and we have actually seen an increase in international delegations coming and touring the Wool Lab and seeing what kind of research is being done there and what kind of knowledge is being produced there. So it's very well known, and it's well used by lots of the region. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. John, show us some of the products that Duckworth is making. I'm fascinated by them.
Well, we'll start with socks, because socks are what we've kind of brought everybody back to wool. If you're not wearing wool socks, you're really missing out on something. But we make several different kinds of wool socks. We've got a really lightweight and a midweight, and we did do a heavyweight, but right now socks are made on certain machinery that yields a certain type of sock, whether you're using a 144 needle machine or 108 needle machine, all those. So kind of the rag wool sock is your common type wool sock, but you can make a sock on any type of knitting machine now. Some of the other products that we make, this is a woven. This is brand new this year. You won't see this until this fall, but this is actually made in American Woolen. It's a company in Connecticut where this is a woven wool product, and a nice semi-lightweight, midweight shirt jacket. I can't wait to get one for myself.
Yeah, that's nice.
It's nice.
And then also in the knits, we do hats. These are two of our hats, the knit Watchman cap, and then kind of the knit looks a little bit more stylish, I guess. Some of the other stuff we do is we've designed and built a wool, we call it our wool cloud insulation.
Wow.
It's a down alternative, and we take wool, and it's actually done in Texas, pretty close to where your family's in the Waco, Texas area, where they make the wool fill, and it's a down replacement. So this is a very nice piece, very, very lightweight and warm. Here's another product that we're just bringing back this year. This is a very difficult product. It's maybe some of you guys can remember your old long john type underwear that was a waffle weave.
Yep.
So we're doing this waffle weave with wool. Very difficult. We're bringing this one back. This is very nice. This is one of my favorite pieces to layer
I
with.
sleep with, that's my sleeping garment. It is, literally.
We do some blends. This is a
Nice looking.
very, very popular with the ladies. If I can get it turned around the right way here. This is our powder high neck, and these sell out very quickly, we found out, and we never did make enough of those, but women love these, and what better thing in Montana to have this nice high neck sweatshirt. And that's a blend of polyester and wool. This is a sample. This is actually a town scarf, but this is our 100% Maverick fabric that we call, and we make shirts and underwear and long johns with this also. But this is 100% jersey made with our finest superfine wool, and very good next to skin.
John, I've got a question here. Where do people find that if they want to buy this stuff in Montana?
One of my partners actually owns the Schnee's Boots.
Okay.
So the Schnee's store downtown is our flagship store, and you'll see a very, very large Duckworth display there. And you can also go online at duckworthco.com, or just Google Helly Wool, Duckworth Wool,
Okay.
and you'll find it. There's a lot of other online retailers that handle it also. This is another woven product made at American Woolen. This is a very heavyweight wool shirt with our, it's a woven fabric, so you can wear it as a shirt or a shirt jack. It's one of my favorite kind of spring and fall, just shirt jack types, but layer it up in the wintertime and it's excellent. So the nice thing about wool is layering it, and we've got lots of different layers. This is our Maverick, 100% wool, lightweight merino in a zip neck, and that's a very good piece for layering in the wintertime
Okay.
underneath your ski clothing. One nice thing about wool is it wicks your moisture away from your skin, and it even it can absorb 30% of its weight in water and not lose any of its thermal abilities. And this is our most popular fabric. We call it our vapor wool. It's a very lightweight wool. It's a blend of wool, modal, and polyester. So it's a very summer weight wool. We're actually bringing this out with a higher UV. So we're gonna bring this out in the development stages to make this, to where it's ultraviolet, protects you, sunblock. It does a pretty good job of it now, but we want to get it up to SPF 30 or 40. And very, very nice lightweight wool product. So
What's really neat, that's all made with Montana wool.
yeah,
And that's a homegrown product. So if you like homegrown products, here's a good chance to try some of them. Definitely.
and the other one I have, everybody knows the old Duofold long johns. We make our own version of this. It's polyester on the inside and wool on the outside.
Wow.
So everybody knows that polyester is pretty good at wicking, and wool knows what to do with the wicked out moisture. Polyester can wick it, but just doesn't know what to do with it.
Okay.
But wool will actually remove it from the polyester and transpire it. It doesn't evaporate it. Evaporation is what cools you, makes you cold. So when you transpire it, the wool actually absorbs the wool and transpires it out without evaporation. So that's what makes wool. And this is a very, very nice hunting piece, skiing piece, very warm.
All right. Thanks, John. I appreciate that.
You don't have to take these back, do you? Or?
Right. Can we take samples?
Yeah, but they're not extra large.
Well, I was lucky to get a hold of one of our salesmen here in Bozeman, who just lives down the street, that I've got his collection, Jeff Musselman's collection.
All right. From Belt, either John or Brent, this person is raising hair sheep, and I'll be honest, I don't know what a hair sheep is. He says it's excellent meat and animals are personable. Can you address this breed?
Well, there are a couple of, I do share some dairy cross type sheep. There are in my family. I grew up in Texas, a multi-generational sheep operation down there. They've switched to hair sheep. There are a couple of breeds out there. They tend to do, I'm not going to say they don't do well in Montana, because I know people that are raising them, both the Dorper, the Katahdin, things like that. They came in, the Dorpers came out of South America originally, or South Africa originally. They really like a desert type climate, good parasite resistance. They don't have to be shorn. The meat is very good. Obviously, I eat it every time I go home. And so there are, anymore what we see in the sheep industry is there are lots of different niches that people are trying to fill to meet this American demand for American products. We have dairy starting up. We have goat operations starting up, goat dairy starting up. We have a lot of long wool type sheep production coming into Montana. The wool mill here up on Spring Hill Road processes, that goes into a different processing system. And so we see a lot of micro mills kind of starting around the state that are handling or trying to handle the processing on that different type of wool that really doesn't fit into, I guess, our traditional commercial market. So it's exciting to see that, and there's room for everybody. I mean, there's room for this business to grow, and it's nice to see a lot of people trying different things and trying to figure out what works in this state. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. Getting several more questions in here, and this is an interesting one. I want to throw this one up. It's from Yellowstone Park by Visiting Australia. So we reach all over with this program. But this person would like to know, and you guys can address this, we talked a little bit about it before the program. What is the price per pound for dressed lamb that he wants to know you get, but you don't specifically, in the U.S. versus Australian prices? Anybody have a clue on that?
Versus Australian, I think the conversion right now is about 73%. So all wool, like oil is priced, is linked to the American dollar. So basically there's that conversion that when people want to buy oil on a worldwide market, and Anton probably spends a week talking about this, but all the wool in the world is priced on the Australian market, the AWEX market. And so right now, if the Australian dollar is high base compared to the US dollar, then that keeps our wool prices high. When the Australian dollar gets cheap versus the US dollar, then our wool market really suffers. And so right now, with the conversion at about 73 cents, the stuff that I see, and I monitor a lot of Australian Facebook sites and things like that just to kind of keep a pulse on, you never know what's going to happen. They've got a foot and mouth outbreak in South Africa right now, and so that's caused some hiccups in kind of the world lamb supply and wool supply. But on parity, I would say right now, actually, the Australian market looks to be a little higher right now on lamb. It stays about where we are, but I know last year, kind of doing some comparative, their wool is always a little higher than ours. I think we normally run about 75 to 80% of the value of what the Australian wool generally sells for, but we're pretty comparable, I would say.
Yep. Quick question here. Care of woolen products. Can wool be washed? Wash machine and stuff?
I'll let John answer that one.
Well, wool has this unique characteristic called felting also. So wool fibers are actually strands. They're not hair. It's actually different than a hair follicle. And wool has scales on it. So when you agitate wool, and you can do it even more with water, heat, and that's how you make felt, is when you agitate the wool fibers go together and the scales prevent them from releasing. So there are some processes that actually polish the wool fibers so that they act more like synthetic, and they can be machine washed and take more agitation. But we like to tell people that you're buying some very high performance gear and treat it that way. Because wool, and some of our products are super washed, which is that method that we use to make them machine washable. But our preference is to have wool in its natural, unique form, because I think that's when it does the most good for what you're going to use it for as gear. But like our socks that need to be laundered more often, they are super washed. Our hats are super washed. Like this sweater I wear, we're using super washed wool in it. Definitely some of this waffle weave is going to be super washed. But this will probably need to be handled very carefully, because we don't want to use a super washed wool in this. It gives it the real look that you want. It's super soft, and you guys can
I
go ahead and
assume that there's an instruction on each garment
Yeah.
that goes out how to treat.
Yeah, like with
you're gonna get that
pesticide,
back.
read and follow the label.
Right. Yeah,
Follow the
right.
label.
Jane, thanks for that comment. From your area, Dylan, is the milkweed planted to attract monarch butterflies toxic to grazing animals or wildlife?
Yeah, so actually in Montana, I think we have 12 native species of milkweed. There's a lot of different species out there. All of them have some toxicity. The good thing is most animals don't want to eat milkweed because it doesn't taste very good unless they're forced to eat it. So very rarely are there cases where there's a toxicity issue related to milkweed. So,
Anton, crystal ball time. Spring wheat versus winter wheat next year. What's the prediction? This guy can't make up his mind.
Well, in terms of prices, winter wheat it's already in the ground. We already know what's going on in that market. Prices have dropped about $1 in the past 2 months or so per bushel, so that's been tough. And globally, we're going to see a slight increase likely in wheat planting. In the U.S., however, we are going to see a decrease in overall wheat planting. We're going to see the lowest number of acres that we've seen since 1919. So, and we're likely going to see an El Nino year down in the Midwest, more rain, lower temperatures, which is likely going to increase whatever yields we're going to see in the Midwest, which is likely going to decrease protein levels. Okay, so that means that protein premiums are likely going to be high. Spring wheat is the higher protein wheat. So if I had to make a prediction, I would say possibly spring wheat is going to have the higher upside.
Possibly.
Possibly. I don't want to commit to that.
Yeah, all right, thank you. John Brent, this person would like to know, what do you do with the older ewes that you no longer use for wool production? Do they go into, quote, mutton, and what is mutton?
So a lot of those actually it used to be, free trade and these type of agreements on everybody's mind. Most of those ewes used to be shipped to Mexico and harvested down there. And a lot of them were converted into a product most of you know is chorizo, that spicy Mexican sausage.
yeah.
That's where a lot of that, and it'd come back for pizza toppings and the breakfast burritos and things like that. They've started harvesting some of those ewes now in Colorado is where some of them go, but that tends to be the type of product. A lot of them too will end up, I know when we're shopping for dog food, we try and buy a pretty high-end type dog food for our working dogs, both the herding dogs and the livestock guardians. And so you're starting to see a lot more lamb and rice formula type products, and so some of those older ewes that have outlived their usefulness, they're working their way into those type of products.
All right.
So it should be ewe and rice,
Ewe
not
and rice.
necessarily lamb and rice.
That's right.
I have a follow-up question. At what age do you stop taking wool from a ewe?
Well, a sheep will produce a wool clip every year. And, as far as, the cull ewe market, we sell most of our commercial ewes at either 5 or 6 years old. So they'll go out into a farm flock market or something. Our range sheep operation has to cover lots of miles. You saw the pictures of where we're trailing those sheep to. So we sell a lot of ewes off the ranch, go into farm flock operations in the Midwest and somewhat in like Washington State. We've gone into Idaho, into Utah sometimes. And those sheep will have a few more years in a retirement home, maybe,
Okay.
where they have a little bit better access to feed. Don't have to hike a 10,000-foot mountain to get it.
Okay. Interesting question. I had not thought of this, but now they have me thinking. This person wants to know, looking at the patterns and the dyes and so forth, does the wool from black sheep have to be separated from the wool from white sheep for processing purposes?
And the caller that called in about hair sheep, that wool has to be handled totally separately, and that's why we try and differentiate. Say the long wool type wool has to be handled separately. Hair sheep wool, that hair does not take a dye like wool does, and so it needs to be kept completely separate from this wool. So we just had a wool handling school at Bozeman about 3 weeks ago, talking about these differences in terms of how, when we, as an employee, if you go onto a ranch with the shearing crew and handle wool, we pull the bellies out, we pull what we call the top knots out, the floor sweepings, and then we have to sort that wool by line too. So any blackface sheep, medium wool type, so Hamp, Suffolk, Shropshire, those type sheep, that wool all gets bagged separately from, say, the wool that, I don't know how many times Claire's 4-H project, Suffolk, came through John's shearing trailer the other day, and we kept dumping her out because we can't shear, have that black fiber contamination with the wool. It just won't take a dye that the white wool does. So.
Is that one of the reasons that there are no black sheep in New Zealand? Or very few?
Well, it is a contaminant. So when you produce the first stages of wool, you produce wool top, and that's one of the measurements in wool top is the black fiber count. Okay. So we used to have black sheep. Our old-time sheep herders, they wanted one black sheep for every 100 head. So they'd go out and count their blacks, and if they had all their blacks, they had all their sheep. So we still have genetically produced some black lambs. Okay. And we'll get, half a dozen black lambs every year in each bunch of sheep. And our herders still use them, they count. And I had one herder this summer actually tell me, he said he was short 2 black lambs. And we looked and looked, and we finally found them. We were out about 150 head of sheep and found them. So, natural black is one thing too that's highly sought after. There's a good market for some of our black ewe lambs. They'll go into a market, and I know a gal in Dillon that has some black sheep, and they're all named, and each one of the black fleeces, and there's a lot of them too, but she hand spins them, and each black sheep produces a different colored black yarn. And it is very, very sought after. She's made me some socks and stuff too.
Wow.
So
that's interesting.
It's some pretty nice stuff.
Fascinating question. Thank you. I have to admit, I got back from the Midwest last night, and I turned the TV on, and I saw John on CBS, and a program is called Under the Big Sky program. It's very good, by the way. This person saw that, and he wants to know who trains your dogs.
Well, they're naturally. We get border collies, and if you've ever been around one, they're pretty high-strung, very intelligent dogs. So a lot of it's instinct, and then it's just like a horse, or any other animal. There are certain techniques used to train those dogs to do the work for you, and it's like everybody knows. We all love dogs, and dogs love to please. So you're just directing that animal on how you please the owner, and they love to please. So, and actually, you know, it's kind of like a fetching motion.
Right.
Well, if you take a border collie just on natural instinct, and we've found a lot of these border collies that, you know, early, you know, when I was younger, cowboys started getting border collies to use, and they said, oh my God, this dog, he's just terrible. He just keeps getting in the lead. And I'm like, well, maybe you should go on the other side of the cows and he will bring them to you. And I've got some cattle people that just love border collies now, and I had to learn the hard way too, because I remember our first border collie came from Scotland. My dad got one, and I just fought that dog. He just was always in the wrong spot. And finally, the dog taught me that I was in the wrong spot.
Yeah, you're right. John, thanks for coming. We're running low on time. We had a lot of questions tonight, a lot of good questions. Thank you, viewers, for calling them in. Brent, good to have you here for the first time. We'll definitely have you back. Folks, next week we have Bob Quinn. Bob is from Big Sandy, organic producer and author. Be sure to tune in. You'll have a great experience. Have a good week. Good night.
Montana Ag Live is made possible by the Montana Department of Agriculture, the MSU Extension Service, the MSU Ag Experiment Stations of the College of